Good morning. My name is Henry Fay, and today I will be giving my academic case study speech. I will be giving it on case study number 7, the behavioral disorder of William Billy Stark. Let us begin. It is necessary at any time to consider behavior, for it is the cause and effect of both the form and the feeling of human nature. It is a part of our being that practitioners of psychology of all kinds base their knowledge. Behavior is, however, an individualistic and complex topic, much the same as all other human subjects, especially those in which behavior is closely related. It is often insufficient to analyze one person with the contextual data of many, and the vice versa is also, if not more so, true. In this, practitioners of psychology also turn to anecdotal pretext and evidence. This allows individuals to be more accurately assessed and treated. In a perfect world, this would be the end of the speech. However, the world is not so. So the speech goes on. As a summary of the case study that is our subject will show, extrapersonal circumstances and quote-unquote civilized, as we often call them, in institutions can often hamper or delay any attempt to properly analyze and remedy an individual. Now that this has been stated, I will now introduce you to our subject, Mr. William Billy Stark. For the sake of cohesion, I will be calling him just Mr. Stark. Okay. Mr. Stark, at the time of study, a study which, in complete honesty, seems rather lackluster in and of itself. This is important that I tell you this just so that you understand the pretext of where I'm coming from. The majority of the data seems to come from after the fact secondary source in interviews, primarily the principal and the teachers who's worked with them. These interviews, right, okay. The secondary sources are all from within the same schooling institution, which means there is not enough diversity on the subject. The data is without citation, it's pretty much just hearsay, and the study lacks both an author name as well as an organizational name. So there is both no citation and also no accountability for what is stated. But Mr. Stark, at the time of study, was an early middle school student, just entering middle school. He was considered both troubled and special needs by those around him, and was reported to have fulfilled those considerations in his behaviors. He was expelled from his previous grade school for these problems, and was prone to both violence, including, ranging from simple disrespect to actual physical violence, all the way to drug use. As a result of this, he was both antisocial and heavily deficient in academic know-how. The teachers and staff made a rather unorganized attempt at assessment and treatment of Mr. Stark within the limits of their own educational system. Particularly one Mr. Banta, who is stated to have been a primary teacher of Mr. Stark, but it is, however, unclear within the wording of the case study as to the exact extent that Mr. Banta was involved with the student. This goes back to what I was saying, where it is quite lackluster. It is possible that he was simply a teacher who was often made the victim of Mr. Stark's outbursts by the administration who governed him, and administration that simply did not have the care to help the child themselves. Mr. Banteau suffered in his job performance as a result of this, and he may have tried to distance himself from the child, including seeing him as minimally as possible. To that contrary, contrary to what I just said, it is also possible that he worked intimately with the child, testing and trying whatever he could in order to help him. This included trying to get him more into reading through comic books and biographies of rock stars, to just sitting down talking with him. Ultimately, he failed in his attempts, as the child refused to respond to him in any way at all, and even when he did sometimes respond, it wasn't very well. And Mr. Stark ended up moving away before the end of middle school, where they later learned that he was taken to juvie, and then they lost track of him. Whatever the state of Mr. Bance's professional relationship to the boy was, somebody had undauntingly attempted to help Mr. Stark, but ultimately failed, as the subject did not allow them to, and external circumstances brought an early end to the effort. The case study is actually successful in its point, however. You see, the analysis that concludes the paper is framed not only as a study of Mr. Stark, whose symptoms are quite typical of behavioral disorder, but as a showcase of the uncoordinated, collectivist mindset of the educational institutions that deal with these people. That is, to push the problem student farther away, is to make the institution run on a whole, that is, more smoothly. And the external circumstances that make deviation from this mindset in an attempt to help any said student who is a problem student rather pointless. It can be extrapolated that, given what we have already talked about, this large-scale problem is unlikely to be altogether solved, as behavioral issues by nature are complex and individualistic, and an educational system by nature will be equally complex but largely impersonal. Now, it is not that the problem just because the problem is not completely solvable does not mean it can't be mitigated. It is likely that these case studies, such as the one that we have explored, will continue to be prevalent as long as the human society that the individual, as well as the particular educational system inhabit, remains altogether disjointed. But it can be mitigated or remedied by a collective shift towards institutional cohesion on a grand scale. Thank you.